Okay, we'll just get started now. Continue taking your food. Welcome to another year of the Dine and Learn. Thank you, Moish, for arranging this once again. Thank you for Anonymous, who sponsored the delicious dinner. This summer, we're going to be talking about Nevuah, about prophecy, and as our text, we're going to be using the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, Perek Zayin, which we have photocopies of here. You see, it's a very short perek with almost no commentary. We're going to be lucky if we get to the end because there's a lot of commentary that's not on the page that should be. We're going to be talking about what the Rambam says, what the Rambam doesn't say, what other Rishonim say. There's a tshuva of the Rashba. Someone was claiming to be a Navi in his day. What do the Rashba have to say about that? And we're going to be talking about whether there's such a thing as there could be such a Navi today. It's possible. And Yis Hashem, we'll get to the last halacha is extremely interesting and important, how to tell a fake Navi. We'll see how far we get if we get to that, because there's really we could just give the whole summer just on that subject. Interesting thing is, the Rambam doesn't talk about Nevuah in just this one parak. The Rambam talks about it throughout his whole life, throughout all his writings, in the commentary in the Mishnah, the earliest thing that he wrote when he was a teenager, he started. In all his three big introductions there, his introduction to the entire commentary, his introduction to Pirkei Avos, which has 8 chapters, the Shemona Prakim, and his introduction to the Perek Khilah, where he talks about the Yud Gimel Ikari Emunah, he talks a lot about Nevuah there. More Nevuchim. Actually, in the commentary to the Mishnah, he even says that he wants to write a Sefer Nevuah. Now, I don't think he meant a Sefer of Nevuahs. I think he wanted to write a Sefer about Nevuah, and the commentators suggest that they think that turned into More Nevuchim. Because in More Nevuchim, at the end of the second Perek, second Chelek, there are many chapters talking about Nevuah. So why, before we even start the Rambam, why does the Rambam spend so much time on Nevuah? And there are a number of reasons, and I'm going to tell you some obvious ones, and I'll tell you what I think is also true. I think they're all right. Number one, Nevuah is how we know what Hashem wants us to do. The Torah is Nevuah. That's important. Without Nevuah, there's no Torah, there are no mitzvos. So of course you have to talk about Nevuah. Okay? Number two, the Rambam was a philosopher, and philosophically it's complicated. How does Nevuah work? How does Hashem, who is totally spiritual, communicate to us? We're physical. It's not impossible, but it's something that any philosopher would want to discuss. How does that happen? Also, this happens to me at work a lot in my career over 20 years. Work with a lot of non-Jews, Christians, and they grow up in their Christian environment, in their community, and to them, Jesus, it's much to say his name. I'll be alternating just so the Rabbi Hildesheimer in the mid-1800s in Germany was asked to Shiloh, is a teacher allowed to say the name Jesus in class? And Rabbi Zriel went through the whole sugya, and just like all the other poskim say, it's perfectly mutter to say that name. The last name you're not supposed to say, because that implies some sort of divinity or holiness. But the first name is perfectly mutter. But then he said, why would you do that? If nobody says it, why do you need to be different? What's the need to be different? So in this context, I'll be alternating back and forth. You'll understand why, because there's a conversation between me and Christians that it makes sense to use the name, which is totally mutter. But I'll be alternating just to make the point that we don't have to use it. So they grew up with him, and they asked me, so what do Jews think about Jesus? Because to them it's confusing. Because everyone they know holds he's the best thing since sliced bread, even better than sliced bread. So what do we think? Do we think he's a prophet? Do we think he's just a holy man? So I used to say, we don't think about him. And I thought that was pretty clever. Confuse them like anything. They just didn't chop what I was trying to say. That he's just not in our vocabulary, really, not something that we ever think about. So I came up with a better answer through a mashal, through an analogy. Not such a complicated mashal, but I say to them like this. To Muslims, Muhammad was a holy prophet who came, who revealed God's true word and created this new religion which removed idolatry from the known universe at that time. To Christians, Muhammad was some guy who started a new religion, nothing special. That they understand. To them, it was what if you say Christian, what does Muhammad mean to you? And they're like, I don't know, just don't draw a cartoon of him, right? That's all they know. Because he's not important to them. So I say to you, Christians, so Yashka was whatever, the Son of God, he came with a new covenant and it changed everything, started a whole new religion, changed everything. To us, he was just some guy. So what you think of Muhammad is what we think of Yoshko. And that, I think, they think about that, and it makes sense to them. It really conveys that to us, he was nobody. He was a guy who had a huge impact on history, but is not no religious significance whatsoever to us. Not a prophet, not a holy man, not a rabbi. Someone who had an impact on history, but that's it. So that's not such a great answer. If you would have asked the Rambam, he would have given a better answer. Because effectively what I'm doing, let's say we turn that into a disputation. I'm arguing with a Christian. The Christian says, Jesus was very important, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I would say, no, he wasn't. And they would say, well, yes, he was. And I would say, no, he wasn't. And rabbit season, duck season, we're not getting anywhere. If you would say that to the Rambam had a much better answer. You would say, if you would say Yoshko was a prophet and he had a new covenant from God and overturned the laws of the Torah and gave us a new way, the Rambam would have said, doesn't matter. It has no impact whatsoever. Why not? This is something the Rambam emphasized again and again and again. Moshe Rabbeinu, if you look in the Chumash, it says, Lo kam b'Yisrael od navi k'Moshe. And it says also in a few weeks ago that Hashem has this unique Nevuah to Moshe Rabbeinu that no one else has. So don't come and tell me you have Muhammad, who is the great prophet. It doesn't matter. Moshe Rabbeinu was the only unique prophet. That's what the Torah tells us. So any other prophecy you might say, you might have, has no impact.
But I'm assuming that the Christians don't believe that he's God himself.
Okay, so the conversation's not over. But when it comes to a prophecy, so it can be no prophecy that overrides Moshe Rabbeinu. And that is an important argument in the literature, the arguments between Jews and Christians. And the Rambam's answer is, I don't care if you say he had a prophecy, I don't care if he had anything from God, it doesn't matter, because you can't overturn Moshe Rabbeinu. God himself said that. So that, I think, is why the Rambam emphasized Nevuah so much. And why he talks about it again, and you'll see as we go through this parak in the Mishnah Torah, you'll see that this comes up again. The Rambam always emphasizes the uniqueness of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, as opposed to all the other Nevi'im. Okay, so let's get started. Miyasodei Hadas, this is Hilchos Yisodei Torah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Aleph. Miyasodei Hadas Leda, Shehakel Minabei Es Bnei Ha'adam. It's a foundation of Yiddishkeit to know that God gives prophecy, conveys prophecy to humans. Let's break it down. It's talking Yisodei Hadas, which means Ikare Emunah. One of the Yud Gimel Ikare Emunah that the Rambam lists is that Hashem gives Nevuah. So there are 13 of these fundamental principles of Yiddishkeit. The first 5 discuss God himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then come the next 4, which discuss Torah. And the first, which means number 6, the first of the Torah, is that Hashem gives Nevuah. And that's what he's saying. Because without Nevuah, as we said, there's no Yiddishkeit, there's no Torah, there's no Judaism. So Nevuah is crucial. Without Nevuah, there is no Judaism. Okay. It's important to know that. Not just to believe, to know that. It's a historical fact. It actually happened. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Nevuah to people. Now, interesting, the Ran in his drashos, so he wants to say that it's logically, he wants to give a logical proof that there must be Nevuah. His drashos Ran in number 5. He says like this: we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world so people will serve him. How do we know how to serve Hashem unless there's some sort of communication? Therefore, there must be Nevuah. How we define Nevuah is communication between Hashem and us. And therefore, the Ran says, logically, there must have been Nevuah. A lot of people don't find this particularly compelling, because maybe we could figure it out on our own. One of the theories of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach is that they're supposed to figure it out. These are all obvious. Don't murder, it's obvious. So maybe we should have been able to figure out all the mitzvahs ourselves. I don't know. So I don't know if you have to say that there's logically impossible for there not to be Nevuah. I think it's enough to say there is Nevuah. It's just a fact. So what is Nevuah? So we say the Rambam starts out, Yisodi Hadas Leda Shakel Menabe. What does this word Menabe mean? He gives prophecy. So the Rambam doesn't explain here, but in More Nevuchim he explains that there are three parts, three elements, or three qualifications to be a Navi. And we're going to talk more about what it takes to be a Navi. We're not going to go too late tonight. We have a few weeks ahead of us. The Rambam basically says there's a right side of the brain and a left side of the brain, in using terminology today. There's what he calls the rational faculty and the imaginative faculty. This is Greek science, which reigned supreme in the Middle Ages. So the rational faculty is, I think, what we call the right side of the brain, right? The right side is the thinking side. We do abstract thought, math, science. Yeah? I don't know. And the left side is a more artistic, creative side, right? Or
Yes, no, right.
I've it right and left. So the way the Rambam says it is that the rational faculty is abstract thought, math, science, philosophy, and the imaginative faculty is where the brain translates what our senses sense. Sight, touch, sound. So somehow that has to get translated into an image, right? Dovi, right now, I'm seeing you, but how do I know what I'm seeing? That's the imaginative part of the brain, which translates it all. So let's say I close my eyes and I picture something. That's also the imaginative side. If I have a dream, it's also the imaginative side. Okay. So the Rambam says Nevuah is Hashem influences first the rational side, our abstract thinking, and then that overflows into the imaginative side. Why is this even relevant? Why am I bringing it up? Because it's actually very interesting what the Rambam says. So he says, let's say there's someone who has a very strong imagination, but not a strong rational side. So he said they can also have some sort of a nevuah. And let's say someone has a strong rational side, but not a strong imaginative side, they can also have some sort of a nevuah. So if you're a strong right side brain, but weak left side brain, and you get some sort of a nevuah, that is, and we'll come back, Amir Hashem will come back to that is a brilliant insight. Boom, you have a great idea. Discovery, genius. That's someone who has a very strong right side. And let's say someone who has these fortune tellers, who have these dreams of what's going to happen in the future. A little truth in there, a little falsehood in there. They're not necessarily mentally stable, all of them. But it could be. So what is that? That's someone who has a strong left side and a weak right side. That's literally what the Rambam says. I found that very, very surprising. Someone who is a great political strategist, the Rambam says, is left side. I would have thought right side. I would have thought they can, but apparently you have to imagine all the different interactions of what could happen and who could say what, where the pieces of the chessboard move. That's apparently imagination. So it's political strategist. So Rambam says, let's say someone's not so smart, but he's got a good imagination, should be a politician.
Does it have to do if you're a lefty or a righty?
I don't think so. I don't know. What do the scientists today say? Right side, left side brain have to do with righty and lefty? I don't know. Why? Are you a lefty?
I am.
You're a lefty.
Lefties are more
I'm not a brilliant.
Are they more creative?
Yeah, they're mostly great artists.
But the music thing, I got the ground was like.
I'm not saying this because I'm a lefty.
Okay.
I'm not saying this whatever.
I don't know. Chazal say it's a mum to be a lefty.
Right, for a coin.
Right. But okay, so but I guess to be a politician, it's not a mum. Maybe it's lefty should be going to politics. So as you see your children, if you need to direct them in a direction, I'm not making any recommendations. Okay. So later time we'll talk about it. The Rambam goes into here that there are actually many different levels of Nevuah. He has, I think, 11 different levels, and what do they mean? And most of them are not as interesting as some of the first levels are actually very fascinating. We talked about who falls into what. It's a little controversial. So Amir Hashem will get to that later. And also, so I said there are three qualifications. There's a rational side, there's an imaginative side, and the Rambam has a third very, very important side, the moral aspect. The Rambam says you have to have a moral qualification in order to be a Navi. And this is going to be very, very important. But basically it means you have to be a tzaddik. If you're not a tzaddik, forget about it. You're not in the parsha at all. So it could be if you're not fully moral, it means you can't fully develop any of your other abilities. You can't become fully intelligent because your Yetzer Hara will always direct your intellect to justify, to explain, to anything whatever you want. that could be what the Rambam has in mind, but he definitely holds that. So let's say if you look at all the Nevi'im, we'll get to the Mitzvah Hashem, we'll get to this in a future week. Not all of them seem to display the perfect midos that we would expect of a Ben Torah, and so that the Rambam uses to explain the different levels of Nevuah.
And how does that convert to like a Bilam Navi?
Yes, the Rambam is very much cognizant of that problem, and we'll get to that in Mitzvah Hashem. It's not clear he was a Navi, and that's machlokas there. The Ran says something interesting. I noticed this when I was a teenager, and I mentioned it to a conservative rabbi in my neighborhood, who was a big scholar, and he said I was wrong, but I recently saw that the Ran said it. So now I found a Rishon who said what I said. If you look at the Nevi'im throughout Tanakh, you'll see there's decreasing clarity in the Nevuah as you go through time. Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, sees it very clear. As you go further, Yirmiyahu sees it, Yeshayahu, you get to the Treyasar, Zechariah, not clear at all. Malachi, you go to Daniel even says he doesn't know what the Nevuah is. So as you go through time, so the Ran says, every generation, as you move farther away from Matan Torah, from Har Sinai, we lose something. We know that when it comes to Torah Shabbal Peh, as we go farther away from Har Sinai, we lose some of the Torah Shabbal Peh. Generation after generation, we don't have exactly what they had. The Ran says it also applies to Nevuah. The farther away you go from the original of it, who was the Av HaNevi'im, the father of all Nevi'im, was Moshe Rabbeinu. As we go farther away, grandson, a spiritual grandson, great-grandson, and so on, you lose it. And that's how the Ran explains Tanakh, so the conservative rabbi said to me, no, when it's the Nevuahs about Mashiach, those aren't clear. Other Nevuahs are clear. So he said it had nothing to do with time, but the Ran disagreed. The Ran says, like I said, that as you go farther away from Moshe Rabbeinu, it becomes less and less clear. So let's start the next few lines. We're on the second line of the Rambam. Ve'ein ha-nevuah Khilah, and the Nevuah only rests on someone ela al chacham gadol bechachma, someone who is great, wise, and wisdom. We'll see why he says that. Gibor b'midosov, someone who is brave, mighty in his midos. Velo yehe yitzro miskaber olav, and his Yetzer Hara does not overcome him. B'davar ba'olam. So this sounds familiar, right? Gibor, that he doesn't allow his Yetzer Hara to come over him. Someone yell it out. Pirkei Avos. Yes. Ezu, exactly, Harry. Ezu Gibor HaKovish is Yitzro. The Rambam is explicitly quoting from that. Okay, so we have a few minutes. I'll just quote the Gemara, which Mr. Shem will start with next time. The Gemara in the Durham says, Ein hashchina shara, ela al chacham, gibor, ashir, ve'onav. In order to get hashras hashchina, to have the divine presence rest on you, you need to be a chacham, you need to be a gibor, you need to be an ashir, and you need to be an onav. Wise, brave, mighty, rich, and modest. Humble. Those are the four requirements. That's the Gemara in the Durham.
Sounds similar to being a shofet or a Dine. You know, I think that in times those are very similar qualifications.
It's very similar. There are many more qualifications to be a Dayan.
But those are the root.
Right.
Foundation.
And then the Gemara continues to learn. They say, "Kulan mi Moshe." We learn them all out from Moshe, because Moshe was so big he could lift up the Mishkan, and Moshe was the most anav mikol adam, and all that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a second Gemara in Shabbos which says, "Ein hashchina shara ela al chacham gibor asher ubal koma." You have to be wise, you have to be mighty, you have to be wealthy, and you have to be tall. Tall. You have to be tall to be a Navi. No, not all of us make it. The Rambam doesn't seem to have had that Gemara, that text of the Gemara, and it's clear from other places. And once I saw someone mention it, and then I started looking through the Rishonim, it seems most Spanish, most Fardim have this text. Ain't Nevuah Shora ela al chacham gibor ve'ashir. So number one, instead of Shechina, it's Nevuah, and number two, he only has three. So we have a machlokas in our text. We have a machlokas between the Darim and Shabbos. The Rambam didn't have that machlokas. It was just Chacham, Gibor, and Ashir, and it's Nevuah. So the kasha is, which we'll leave off tonight, and we'll Amir Hashem return to next week. The Rambam doesn't mention Usher. So you have to be a Chacham, and you have to be a Gibor. What happened to Usher? So Amir Hashem, leave it on a suspenseful, it'll be a cliffhanger, and next week Amir Hashem will continue.